Culion had its own money, police force, courts, schools, and hospital. What most residents did not have was the freedom to leave. During the 20th century, this Philippine island grew into the world's largest leprosy colony, celebrated by doctors even as families were separated and private lives were controlled. Its history asks a harder question than whether segregation slowed disease. When care depends on confinement, who decides where medicine ends and punishment begins? Subscribe to join us as we recover the human stories behind Asia's historic places. On August 22, 1904, Civil Governor Luke Edward Wright signed Executive Order No. 35. With a few lines of administrative language, the American colonial government reserved Culion for a leprosy colony and a government stock farm. The order did not identify a medical property in the soil, water, or climate. It identified an island that officials believed they could control. That distinction began with the political transformation of the Philippines. In 1898, Spain surrendered the archipelago to the United States under the Treaty of Paris. Filipino revolutionaries had already declared independence, and American sovereignty was imposed through a war against the Philippine Republic. Public health institutions were therefore built inside a larger project of conquest and colonial administration. Sanitation, vaccination, quarantine, and disease surveillance could save lives. They could also expand the state's ability to classify people, enter communities, and regulate movement. Leprosy, now commonly called Hansen's disease, seemed especially suited to this new administrative vision. Gerhard Armauer Hansen had identified the bacterium associated with the disease in 1873. By the beginning of the 20th century, most medical authorities accepted that it was infectious. Yet they did not fully understand how transmission occurred, why some exposed people never became ill, or why the disease progressed differently from one patient to another. There was no consistently effective cure. That combination of knowledge and uncertainty encouraged a severe conclusion. If medicine could not reliably cure the patient, government could try to separate the patient from the population. This differed in scale and purpose from the system inherited from Spain. For centuries, religious institutions had cared for people with leprosy at San Lazaro Hospital in Manila and at smaller establishments in places such as Cebu and Nueva Cáceres. Conditions varied, and separation was part of institutional life, but there was no comprehensive program to search the entire archipelago, identify every suspected case, and transport all confirmed patients to one national colony. The older institutions primarily offered custody, shelter, and religious care. The American plan aimed at something more ambitious, the eventual elimination of the disease through systematic segregation. The language of the period presented that ambition as both scientific and benevolent. Removing patients, officials argued, would protect the healthy while placing the sick where food, housing, treatment, and trained supervision could be concentrated. But the promise concealed a basic imbalance. The government would decide who was dangerous, where that person must live, and when departure might be permitted. Medical classification was becoming a form of civil authority. Dean Conant Worcester was one of the most influential advocates of this approach. A zoologist who became Secretary of the Interior, Worcester supervised agencies responsible for health and used surveys, reports, statistics, and photography to portray the Philippines as a population requiring expert management. Victor George Heiser, who became Director of Health in 1905, brought the same confidence to disease control. To these administrators, scattered local care appeared inefficient. A single isolated settlement promised measurable results and centralized command. The Philippine Commission committed $50,000 to the project in October of 1902. Officials examined possible sites, including Cagayan de Jolo in the southern Philippines, before favoring Culion in the Calamian Islands of northern Palawan. Culion was distant from Manila but reachable by government vessel. Its channels and surrounding water created boundaries that could be watched more easily than roads through a crowded province. It offered land for buildings, cultivation, and expansion. Most important, the sea could perform part of the work of walls. Yet Culion was not an empty geographical instrument waiting for colonial medicine. The island stood within a region long inhabited and used by Calamian Tagbanua communities, whose lives were connected to its forests, coasts, fishing grounds, and neighboring islands. Culion also had an established settlement and a history reaching through the Spanish period. Colonial planning reduced this human landscape to the qualities administrators valued most: distance, acreage, anchorage, and controllable access. The needs of the future institution took precedence over the meaning the place already held. Executive Order No. 35 formalized that change in 1904. During the following year, preparations accelerated. Construction crews began creating the facilities required to receive patients and staff. Administrators planned housing, water, transport, medical supervision, and food supplies for a settlement expected to grow. The project was described as an organized answer to a national health problem. It was also being designed as a place from which return would depend on official permission. Culion, then, was chosen not because the island could cure leprosy. It was chosen because geography could isolate people, and because a health agency could govern nearly every condition of life inside that isolation. Contemporary science supplied the fear of contagion. Colonial administration supplied the machinery. The sea supplied the boundary. By the end of 1905, the policy had a location, an appropriation, and buildings taking shape. What it did not yet have was the population that would make it function. The people who arrived at Culion in 1906 would not simply enter a hospital. They would enter a legal order preparing to decide where they could live, whom they could remain with, and whether they would ever be allowed to return home. On May 27, 1906, the government Coast Guard cutters Mindanao and Polillo reached Culion carrying 365 people with Hansen's disease from the Visayas. The official total is precise. The departures behind it are harder to recover. Each passenger had left a household, livelihood, or community on another island, often without knowing when removal would end. They arrived not at a finished sanctuary, but at a settlement where preparations were incomplete and basic necessities remained inadequate. The first arrivals found buildings intended to separate patients from the staff supervising them, along with a hospital short of personnel. Culion had fresh water, land, and plans for expansion, but not enough food, housing, or medical attention. The central promise was protection. Patients would receive care while the wider population would be protected from infection. Yet for those transported, the immediate fact was separation. The sea behind them was now an administrative boundary. The colony initially operated before the government had created its most comprehensive enforcement law. Officials could gather patients through existing health powers, but Victor George Heiser wanted a national system reaching from each municipality to the Central Health Office. That system arrived on September 12, 1907, when the Philippine Commission enacted Act No. 1711. Its title stated its purposes: apprehension, detention, segregation, and treatment. The order of those words mattered. The Director of Health and his agents could have any person alleged or believed to have leprosy arrested and delivered for medical inspection. Provincial and municipal officials were required to assist. Police officers who suspected a case within their district were obligated to report it. A diagnosis was no longer simply information exchanged between physician and patient. It could activate the machinery of the state. The law included procedural safeguards. Petitions and protests were to receive consideration. If someone challenged the diagnosis, permanent removal to Culion was not permitted until bacteriological examination confirmed the disease. This acknowledged that a mistake could destroy a life. But the safeguard operated inside a coercive structure. A person could still be detained and examined while officials controlled the location, process, and terms of release. Medical confirmation did not create consent. It authorized confinement. The law also anticipated what would happen to property left behind. When detention endangered a patient's money or possessions, a provincial treasurer could act as guardian until a court appointed someone else. The provision offered protection against theft, but it also revealed the expected disruption. Removal could separate an adult not only from home and family, but from the ability to manage land, savings, tools, animals, or a business, nor could relatives quietly prevent the process without risk. Anyone who knowingly concealed a person with leprosy, helped that person remain hidden, or provided support while avoiding the authorities could be fined as much as 200 pesos, imprisoned for as long as 6 months, or receive both penalties. The law placed family loyalty in conflict with public duty. A spouse, parent, neighbor, or friend offering shelter could be treated as an obstacle to disease control. Officials attempted to persuade communities that Culion offered food, treatment, order, and safety. At the same time, public campaigns emphasized the danger posed by an undetected patient. This combination of promise and fear encouraged reporting and deepened stigma. A visible mark on the skin could attract suspicion. Local officers became extensions of the health service, and information from neighbors could begin the path toward examination and removal. People responded in predictable human ways. Some hid symptoms, some moved before inspectors arrived. Families concealed relatives or disputed diagnoses. Others resisted transportation after confirmation. These actions did not prove that people failed to understand medicine. They reflected an understanding of what the diagnosis could cost. Even if Culion offered better care than a remote village, accepting treatment could mean surrendering home, relationships, and freedom of movement. Once Act No. 1711 was in force, transports became regular. Patients were collected from different provinces, held at detention facilities, and moved by ship. By 1910, 5,303 people had been brought to Culion. The population grew from hundreds to thousands in less than 5 years. Staffing, housing, food supplies, and treatment capacity struggled to keep pace. The colony's size would soon be presented as evidence of administrative achievement. From inside, scale could mean overcrowding and dependence. The first residents of Culion were therefore not settlers in the ordinary sense. Most had not chosen an island where they wished to begin again. They had been classified, collected, and transported under a program that treated isolation as both medicine and law. Some would eventually build durable lives there. That later achievement should not obscure the conditions under which the community began. By 1910, the government had created a vast medical enclosure. It had not solved how thousands of people were supposed to live within it for years, and often for life. Patients could not remain indefinitely as names on hospital registers. They needed houses, food, work, worship, rules, exchange, and social belonging. The colonial state had created a place of confinement. The people sent there were about to turn it into a town, although the town itself would still belong to the hospital. Beginning in 1913, a resident of Culion could be paid with money that was almost useless anywhere else. The first special coins were struck in aluminum, marked with the Bureau of Health on one side and Culion Leper Colony on the other. They purchased food, goods, and services within the settlement. Their restricted circulation reflected a fear that money handled by patients might carry infection beyond the island. The coins enabled commerce, but also made the boundary of segregation small enough to hold in one hand. By then, Culion was no longer simply a collection of wards. The arrival of more than 5,000 patients had forced administrators to construct an entire physical environment. More than 400 houses were eventually built, along with dormitories, staff quarters, dining halls, warehouses, docks, a post office, and a store. A piped water system fed reservoirs. Sewers and waste facilities served the dense population. There was a town hall, a school, a theater, and a repaired church. Streets connected institutions that belonged to separate agencies in an ordinary town. In Culion, nearly all of them answered to the health service. The hospital did more than treat disease. It supervised sanitation, housing, employment, movement, discipline, and trade. The chief physician held both medical and administrative power. A decision made in the name of health could determine where someone lived, what work was expected, and whether contact with another part of the settlement was permitted. The colony could not function through outside employees alone. Many people with Hansen's disease remained capable of working, particularly before nerve damage or secondary infections became severe. Residents cooked, cleaned, repaired buildings, cultivated land, tended animals, handled supplies, and produced goods. Some worked as nursing aides, assisting patients whose disabilities were greater than their own. Others provided services or maintained the water, food, and sanitation systems. This labor gave residents wages and responsibilities, creating a life larger than the identity of patient. It also served the institution. The law permitted health officials to require a reasonable amount of labor when physicians considered it appropriate. Work could therefore provide dignity, income, and mutual care while remaining part of a system patients had not chosen to enter. The same act might be community building from below and institutional maintenance from above. Religious and medical personnel helped hold the settlement together. The Sisters of St. Paul of Chartres provided nursing and daily care, while Jesuit priests served a population drawn from many provinces. Physicians, nurses, attendants, pharmacists, and civilian workers formed the healthier sector of Culion. Their service was demanding and often sustained patients under difficult conditions. Yet the division between staff and patients remained visible in housing, movement, and authority. Administrators also encouraged municipal life. Residents from different regional and linguistic communities elected representatives. Patient police officers patrolled the settlement, enforced local rules, and helped maintain sanitation. A civil court considered minor disputes. Public duties gave residents a voice in daily affairs and reduced the need for every disagreement to be settled by an American official. But Culion's municipal government was not independent. The chief physician remained above the elected representatives. Rules came from the health administration, and patient officers enforced an order whose fundamental terms they could not repeal. They could address a local quarrel, organize cleaning, or represent a regional group. They could not abolish compulsory segregation or declare that a resident was free to leave. Participation made the colony more governable without transferring sovereignty to the governed. The special currency expressed the same contradiction. It allowed wages to circulate and local businesses to operate. Later issues replaced aluminum with more durable metal, and the coins carried images familiar from Philippine public life. Within Culion, they made ordinary transactions possible. At the boundary, their value ended. The system recognized residents as workers and consumers while marking their economic world as separate. During the 1920s, Culion was officially described as the largest leprosarium in the world and promoted as an international model. Its scale was real. Thousands of patients lived alongside medical workers, religious personnel, and other residents across institutional zones. Visiting officials could point to water systems, organized labor, medical wards, local administration, and public buildings as evidence that segregation could produce an orderly society. Yet Culion did not become the largest because the island generated an exceptional number of cases. It became the largest because the colonial government gathered people from across a vast archipelago and concentrated them in one place. Its population measured both the prevalence of disease and the reach of the state. Every new house represented institutional growth, but many also housed someone removed from another home. By 1927, Culion possessed many features of a town: work, worship, schooling, trade, policing, courts, and entertainment. Residents had created relationships and routines that no administrative plan could manufacture. But the hospital still held authority over the most private parts of life. Culion had police, courts, and money of its own. What it did not have was the right for a family to decide whether that family would be permitted to exist. A healthy child born at Culion could be removed from both parents soon after birth. Officials defended the policy as protection from prolonged exposure to Hansen's disease. Parents could see their babies through the glass walls of a nursery, while nurses and religious sisters provided care. Some children were later sent to foster homes or institutions in Manila. To the health service, separation was preventive medicine. To parents, it was another loss imposed by the authority that had already taken them from their families. Administrators divided male and female patients, particularly at night, and placed unmarried women under close supervision in dormitories. The Sisters of St. Paul of Chartres escorted women to church and medical appointments and regulated courtship according to Catholic teaching. Officials argued that separation would prevent pregnancy, reduce the number of children exposed to infection, and preserve order. Residents did not accept these rules quietly. Men and women met beyond supervision. Some women refused to enter quarters enclosed by barbed wire. During one confrontation with Victor George Heiser, women insisted that they had not asked to be protected from the men. Secret courtship continued despite guards, religious instruction, and punishment. The institution could arrange beds and schedules. It could not eliminate affection or desire. By 1910, repeated failures to enforce separation pushed authorities to permit marriage under strict conditions. Children born to these unions were to be isolated immediately. The arrangement protected some infants from infection, but nurseries introduced other dangers. Records described cramped conditions, too few caregivers, and deaths from childhood illnesses made worse by separation from mothers. Parents resisted surrendering their babies. Some children were eventually allowed to remain with their families until the age of 5 or 6, although extended contact increased the risk that they too would develop the disease. No option was free of harm. Immediate separation could protect a child medically while injuring the family and exposing the infant to inadequate institutional care. Keeping children with their parents preserved attachment, but increased the possibility of infection. What made the conflict coercive was that parents did not hold final authority. The health service decided which risk the family would bear. The same struggle appeared in acts administrators recorded as misconduct. Patients avoided compulsory work, rejected painful or ineffective treatment, gambled, traded outside approved secretly. None was a complete political program. Together they weakened the institution's claim to control every hour of life. What official reports called laziness, vice, or disorder could also be an attempt to recover time, pleasure, and choice. Formal petitions brought limited results. In 1928, authorities again prohibited marriage, citing the health of pregnant women and the growing number of children born outside recognized unions. Residents repeatedly called the ban unjust. The policy demanded that adults behave as disciplined members of a model community while denying them a right available outside Culion. By 1932, years of petitions and clandestine relationships had brought the conflict to a breaking point. Late on Good Friday, March 25th, hundreds of men carrying sticks and hatchets assembled outside a women's dormitory. The crowd demanded that women be free to attend dances and picnics. After midnight, men entered the dormitory and removed about 40 young women. As the confrontation spread, roughly 600 women left the supervised quarters, many joining partners or returning to relatives. The event cannot honestly be remembered as a simple romantic liberation. Oral testimony indicates that some women signaled to men and welcomed the chance to leave. Others hid, and some were taken by men who were not their partners. The challenge to institutional control also created opportunities for coercion within the patient community. Recognizing resistance does not require treating every participant's conduct as just. For a time, the administration lost control. Patient police officers removed their uniforms rather than confront the crowd. A curfew failed to stop movement. Parents rushed to retrieve children from the nursery. In April, a police squad from Palawan arrested 4 leaders. The following month, more than 120 men and women living together were transferred to other leprosaria. Some sang in defiance as the ships carried them away. Officials initially maintained the marriage prohibition, but the revolt made the old arrangement impossible. Courtship was later permitted under regulated conditions, and a committee reconsidered the ban. In November of 1932, officials lifted it while preserving restrictions, including the removal of children and the loss of certain allowances for married women. 17 couples married before the year ended. 244 more followed in 1933. Culion's residents had not abolished medical rule. They had forced it to retreat from part of private life. Their victory remained incomplete because marriage could still carry the price of separation from a child, yet it demonstrated that the people confined on the island were not passive material shaped by colonial policy. Through petitions, evasion, solidarity, and open revolt, they changed the social order imposed upon them. For residents, Culion was where they struggled to rebuild adult lives. Beyond the island, it was becoming valuable for another reason. The same concentrated population that demanded families and autonomy also produced clinical records on a scale few institutions could match. Culion was a community to those living inside it. To international medicine, it was becoming a laboratory. The building that now holds the Culion Museum and Archives was constructed in 1930 as a laboratory. Its rooms preserve clinical files, photographs, instruments, coins, and personal letters. Before they became evidence of memory, many records were evidence for research. The structure now used to recover the identities of Culion's residents once helped turn their diseases into observations, classifications, and medical data. Herbert Windsor Wade arrived as chief physician in 1922. Trained in pathology and bacteriology, he studied how Hansen's disease appeared in tissue, how its forms differed, and how physicians could detect the bacteria consistently. Culion offered an opportunity unavailable to most researchers. Thousands of patients represented many ages, regions, stages of illness, and clinical forms. Doctors could follow cases over years rather than seeing a patient once. That continuity produced valuable knowledge about diagnosis and the disease's natural history. It did not produce a dependable cure. The principal treatment remained chal mugra oil, made from the seeds of Asian trees and used against leprosy for centuries. Taken by mouth, it could cause nausea, vomiting, and digestive distress. Injections were painful and difficult to administer. Chemists developed modified oils and derivatives in hopes of improving absorption and reducing suffering. Some patients improved. Skin lesions faded, symptoms stabilized, and examinations sometimes stopped detecting bacteria. These results allowed certain patients to be classified as bacteriologically negative. But negative did not always mean cured. Bacteria could be missed in a sample, symptoms could return, and people released after apparent recovery sometimes relapsed. A later assessment found relapse among nearly half of one group discharged as negative. The distinction mattered beyond scientific language. A favorable test could determine whether someone might leave Culion. A relapse could return that person to isolation and confirm fears outside. Treatment was therefore connected to liberty, yet the evidence supporting release remained imperfect. Before sulfone drugs became available, no therapy reliably eliminated the infection. Culion's population made it scientifically important, but that importance carried an ethical tension. Researchers could compare treatments and assemble unusually complete records because the government had gathered patients in one controlled place. Medical work brought care, observation, and genuine advances. It also depended on people who had not chosen confinement and had little authority over the institution recording their bodies. Governor General Leonard Wood, a physician before his military and political career, believed research offered the best chance of change. In the middle of the 1920s, Dorothy Wade, Herbert Wade's wife, traveled to the United States to raise money. She worked with writer and fundraiser Perry Burgess to build an organization supporting research. After Wood's death in 1927, the project took his name. The Leonard Wood Memorial for the Eradication of Leprosy was incorporated the following year. Its funding provided research wards, staff housing, equipment, and the new laboratory at Culion. Wade helped design the program and directed its scientific work. The building represented a substantial commitment when colonial budgets were increasingly contested. It also reinforced Culion's international reputation. Scientists came because the island combined a large clinical population, long records, and a laboratory devoted to one disease. Colonial officials presented this work as proof that American administration had brought scientific order and humanitarian purpose to the Philippines. The claim was not entirely invented. Nurses treated wounds, physicians improved diagnostic methods, and researchers shared findings that influenced work elsewhere. But the language of benevolence often concealed the source of Culion's advantage. The laboratory was modern because the colony was large, and the colony was large because the state had transported people there by force. In 1931, the Leonard Wood Memorial Conference on Leprosy convened in Manila. Specialists compared terminology, classification, treatment, and prevention across national systems. The meeting contributed to the creation of the International Leprosy Association and a journal able to circulate research beyond individual colonies. The first issue of the International Journal of Leprosy appeared in 1933, with Wade as a founding editor. Culion had become one of the places from which international knowledge was organized. At the same time, confidence in mass isolation was weakening. Beginning in 1927, treatment stations outside Culion expanded. 7 regional stations were established in 1928 to treat earlier cases closer to home and reduce the flow of patients to the island. Filipino physicians, legislators, and journalists questioned both the cost and humanity of placing so many people in one remote institution. Research was gaining influence even as the policy that made it possible lost support. Culion's scientific reputation was deserved but incomplete. Its doctors helped standardize knowledge, preserve clinical histories, and connect researchers across borders. They did not yet possess a reliable cure, and the laboratory did not free the people whose records filled its cabinets. The institution also remained dependent on the world beyond its shoreline. Food, medicines, fuel, laboratory supplies, and equipment arrived by ship. The sea had been chosen because it could keep patients inside. When war reached the Philippines, that same sea would help keep essential supplies out. A quarantine designed to keep people from leaving can become a trap when its supply system collapses. Culion had farms and fishermen, but it had been built as a centralized medical settlement, not an independent island economy. Its hospital, kitchens, and thousands of inhabitants depended on vessels bringing food, medicine, fuel, and equipment. In peacetime, the sea served the government as a boundary. In war, it became a barrier between the colony and survival. Japanese forces invaded the Philippines in December of 1941. Within weeks, the Philippine Commonwealth Administration had been displaced from Manila, transport routes were breaking down, and occupation was spreading across the archipelago. Culion stood far from major battlefields, but the war still controlled its ports and shipping lanes. The colony required what the disrupted mainland could no longer deliver reliably, and it could not simply send its residents elsewhere. The danger was recognized almost immediately. In January of 1942, a cable from Culion's medical director reached the American Leprosy Foundation. A contemporary newspaper report said that 6,000 patients and 300 attendants faced starvation because the island depended upon the outside world for food. The foundation sought Japanese permission to send a cargo of rice. No answer had arrived. Culion's crisis was not a late, unforeseen consequence of occupation. It was visible near the beginning. The supply system then deteriorated further. A Japanese naval blockade in the Mindoro Strait stopped vessels that had carried food, medicines, and other necessities from Manila. According to the official marker of the National Historical Commission of the Philippines, Japanese forces confiscated food stored on the island. Military requisition and interrupted shipping struck the same vulnerable point. Culion had concentrated thousands of people in one place while leaving their subsistence dependent on decisions made elsewhere. Hunger was followed by shortages of medicine, dressings, fuel, and hospital materials. The laboratory that had given Culion international standing could measure disease, but it could not replace calories or clean bandages. Staff members and patient workers were also weakened. Distributing rations, cleaning wards, and tending wounds all became harder as the people performing those tasks lost strength. For many patients, malnutrition was especially dangerous. Hansen's disease damages peripheral nerves, reducing sensation in the hands, feet, and eyes. Injuries may go unnoticed, ulcers may deepen, and infection may follow. Some residents were already living with impaired mobility, chronic wounds, blindness, or amputations. Hunger weakened resistance to other illnesses and slowed healing. A person did not have to die from Hansen's disease to die, because a body already burdened by it could no longer withstand deprivation. The administration eventually allowed patients to leave the hospital area to search for food. Records preserved by the Culion Museum and Archives describe stronger residents paddling small boats to nearby islands and bartering possessions for provisions, while others attempted to farm. These actions did not mean that the colony had become self-sufficient. They were emergency measures taken after organized supply had failed. There were also reports of Japanese soldiers shooting patients found seeking food beyond the limits imposed upon them. The people once confined in the name of public safety now risked punishment in order to eat. Death became too frequent for ordinary burial. Archival accounts describe bodies placed in a mass grave near the hospital because separate graves could no longer be prepared fast enough. The official national marker states that more than 2,000 patients died from starvation and various diseases during the Second World War. The surviving record does not preserve the final days of every person among them. It does establish the scale, the cause, and the setting. This was not a legend added later to make Culion seem more terrible. It was the documented catastrophe at the center of the colony's wartime history, nor can that catastrophe be explained by remoteness alone. Many Philippine communities suffered hunger during the occupation as trade collapsed, food was requisitioned, and civilians competed with military demands. Culion faced those dangers, with an additional burden created by public policy. For decades, the state had transported people there, restricted their departure, and organized their lives around government provision. Geography had been deliberately turned into an instrument of confinement. When the government's capacity to provide failed, residents retained the confinement without the protection used to justify it. The end of Japanese occupation in 1945 stopped the immediate wartime system, but liberation could not restore the community that had existed before it. Buildings could be repaired and shipping resumed. The dead could not return to their homes, marriages, workshops, or hospital wards. Survivors carried weakened bodies and the memory of an institution that had promised care, then left them exposed at the moment of greatest need. Yet the post-war years brought the medical change Culion had awaited since its founding. Sulfone drugs offered treatment far more effective than chalmugra oil and allowed many patients to become free of detectable bacteria. That achievement forced a question medicine alone could not answer. What happened when a person was cleared to leave, but relatives, employers, and hometowns still feared both the disease and the name Culion? A drug could alter a laboratory result. It could not restore parents lost to hunger, years lived behind a boundary, or a family taught to regard the island as a place of no return. A person could leave the clinic with no detectable bacteria and still have nowhere to go. Treatment did not provide boat fare, work suited to injured hands, a house, or relatives willing to restore a relationship severed decades earlier. This became Culion's post-war contradiction. Medicine was finally weakening Hansen's disease, but the social machinery built around the diagnosis remained. The breakthrough came with sulfone drugs. Their success in the 1940s marked a decisive departure from chalmugra oil and its uncertain results. One sulfone, dapsone, could be taken by mouth and became the foundation of treatment. Used consistently, it attacked the bacterium responsible for the disease and allowed many patients to become bacteriologically negative. Release could now rest on effective medicine. Bacterial control, however, was not physical restoration. Hansen's disease could already have damaged nerves governing sensation, muscles, and eyes. Antibiotics did not restore a lost finger, return feeling to a foot, or reverse blindness. Without sensation, a small burn or cut could become an ulcer. Some survivors still required wound care, protective footwear, or surgery. A certificate could end institutional treatment without ending disability. Dapsone also had limits. It was commonly given alone for years, and interrupted treatment reduced its effectiveness. More seriously, drug-resistant strains appeared and spread. Some patients relapsed after seeming to improve. Dapsone had transformed the prospects of Hansen's disease, but reliance on one medicine created a new weakness. No single drug could safely carry the campaign forever. Philippine law changed before that problem was fully solved. Republic Act No. 4073, approved in June of 1964, declared that people with Hansen's disease should not be confined unless health authorities certified that they required institutional treatment. Others could receive care in government skin clinics, rural health units, or from licensed physicians. The presumption created during the segregation era had been reversed. The normal answer was no longer removal to an island. The law did not empty Culion. Records preserved through the Culion Museum and archives explain why many residents eligible for release remained. Some had severe disabilities or no surviving family connection. Others feared rejection, lacked employment, or needed continuing care. The communities they remembered had changed during their absence, while Culion contained spouses, children, neighbors, churches, and familiar routines. For people brought there when young, the island designated as exile had become the only home they knew. Families now extended across generations, linking former patients, their children, and descendants of health workers. Leaving might offer legal freedom, but produce social isolation. Staying could mean continued medical supervision, yet also kinship and belonging. The decision was voluntary for some, but never free from the consequences of earlier coercion. A person choosing Culion in the 1970s was not necessarily choosing segregation. That person might simply be choosing the community that segregation had left behind. Rehabilitation, therefore, became as important as bacteriological treatment. Programs during the 1970s promoted skills, livelihoods, social assistance, and community participation. The Culion Foundation began its work in 1976, combining medical care with social support and livelihood development. Rehabilitation could not undo nerve damage, but it could adapt work and assistance to the person instead of measuring success only through a laboratory slide. People once managed primarily as patients increasingly became workers, organizers, and community advocates. A stronger medical answer followed. In 1982, the World Health Organization recommended multi-drug therapy. The treatment combined medicines including rifampicin, dapsone, and clofazimine, attacking the bacterium through more than one route and reducing the danger of resistance from treatment with a single drug. As the new therapy spread, active cases and the resident patient population declined rapidly. Culion's justification as a site of mass medical isolation was disappearing. Its political structure still carried the past. The Department of Health retained authority over a community increasingly composed of treated residents, families, and descendants rather than one confined patient population. Culion had advisory bodies and local leaders, but it was not governed like an ordinary Philippine municipality. The distance between medical improvement and normal citizenship became impossible to ignore. Republic Act No. 6659, approved on June 22, 1988, exposed that gap through a limited reform. It authorized qualified Culion electors to vote for the elected provincial officials of Palawan. The law did not create a municipal government for the island. Its importance lay partly in what it revealed. More than 8 decades after the first forced arrivals, Congress still had to specify that eligible residents could participate in provincial elections. Culion continued not because modern medicine had failed, but because its success came faster than society repaired the consequences of segregation. Infection could be cured while disability, poverty, lost family ties, and stigma endured. For many residents, Culion was no longer merely where the government had sent them. It was where their relationships and community survived. If these people no longer required administration as a population of patients, the health agency could not remain their local government forever. After decades of managing portions of life inside an institution, Culion's residents were moving toward a different demand, a government whose authority came from citizens, not from a medical diagnosis. On February 19, 1992, President Corazon Aquino approved Republic Act No. 7193. The law constituted the islands of the former National Reservation for people with Hansen's disease as a municipality of Palawan. Culion would formally exist after approval in a plebiscite. Territory once defined by the people confined upon it was being redefined as a community of citizens. Ratification did not complete the transfer of power. The law required a mayor, vice mayor, and municipal council to be chosen in the next local election. On May 8, 1995, Culion elected its first municipal officials. Hilarion Gia, a teacher who had arrived on the island as a patient, became its first mayor. A medical reservation now had an elected government led by a former patient. The older structure did not vanish immediately. The Department of Health had administered Culion's civil affairs through the institution for generations. On October 29, 1998, a departmental order formally transferred authority over the municipality to its local government. Ordinary civil administration finally passed to elected institutions. That year brought another milestone. The Philippines reached the World Health Organization target for eliminating Hansen's disease as a public health problem. Elimination did not mean the bacterium had vanished or that no new case would appear. It meant prevalence had fallen below one registered case for every 10,000 people. Detection, treatment, examination of contacts, and disability care remained necessary. This was a population threshold, not eradication. Culion made the distinction visible. Multi-drug therapy reduced active disease, but older residents lived with nerve damage, blindness, amputations, chronic wounds, and memories of compulsory separation. Their descendants could carry no infection and still encounter prejudice because of their birthplace. Ending segregation did not remove the need for care, and continuing care did not justify preserving segregation. That balance shaped the hospital's next transformation. Republic Act No. 9790, approved in November of 2009, converted Culion Sanitarium into Culion Sanitarium and General Hospital. The law transferred the former institution's assets, liabilities, and records to the expanded hospital. It also required continued service for indigent people treated under the National Leprosy Control Program and permitted livelihood assistance as part of its responsibility. The hospital now provides general and specialty care and describes itself as the only general hospital serving northern Palawan. Its patients arrive with the range of illnesses and injuries found in any island community. Yet it retains an obligation to people affected by Hansen's disease. This does not mean the colony continues under another name. It means integration need not abandon survivors. The strongest evidence of what preceded this change survives in the former laboratory, built in 1930. The Culion Museum and Archives preserves clinical and administrative records, scientific publications, correspondence, photographs, oral histories, and currency, once usable only inside the colony. Clinical files document disease and treatment. Letters, images, and testimony recover relationships and voices that official categories could not contain. In 2018, the Culion Leprosy Archives entered the memory of the World Regional Register for Asia and the Pacific. The recognition did not celebrate segregation. It acknowledged a primary source collection documenting compulsory removal, medical research, community life, treatment, and the passage from confinement to citizenship. The records resist two distortions, portraying Culion only as a medical triumph or portraying its residents only as helpless victims. Culion is now a living municipality with elected officials, homes, schools, businesses, transportation, a hospital, and ordinary civic life. It is not an abandoned island, nor a quarantine colony operating behind a new title. Hansen's disease has been controlled beyond the point at which mass isolation could claim medical justification. But reduced prevalence is not worldwide eradication, and it is not the end of stigma. The question at the center of Culion's history can therefore be answered. It became the world's largest leprosarium because a colonial government possessed the power to gather thousands of people from across an archipelago and confine them in one isolated place. It became a community because those people formed families, friendships, occupations, institutions, and a shared identity. It became a municipality when residents secured the right to be governed as citizens rather than administered as a category of patients. In May of 1906, the first group arrived under guard aboard government vessels. Culion had been selected because the sea could restrict their return. Generations later, boats approached the same shore carrying residents, workers, patients, relatives, and visitors to an ordinary municipality. The coastline has not changed its position. The meaning of arrival has. Culion does not offer a simple verdict in which medicine was either merciful or cruel. Care existed beside coercion. Scientific progress developed within a system that removed freedom. Effective drugs ended the medical argument for isolation long before society repaired the losses it had created. Curing an infection proved easier than curing the status imposed upon the infected. The island once governed through diagnosis is now governed through citizenship. Its archive preserves the evidence of both realities. Remembering Culion requires holding its medical achievements beside their human cost, while allowing the people who endured that cost to stand in history as more than the name of a disease.